Today we're on pages 388 and 389, Unit 11, Lesson 11. Reciprocal trig functions. You want to have your calculator and highlighter. The three main trig functions are sine, cosine, and tangent. Each of these can be defined in terms of either ratios of the sides of the triangle, meaning SOHCAHTOA. Sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent equals opposite over adjacent, or the unit circle. All three each has a reciprocal trig function. These definitions are as follows. Secant, abbreviated SEC, is equivalent to the reciprocal of cosine. Secant, SEC, would equal the reciprocal of cosine. So if cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, secant would be hypotenuse over adjacent. Cosecant, which is abbreviated CSC, is equivalent to the reciprocal of sine. So if sine is opposite over hypotenuse, then cosecant would equal hypotenuse over opposite. And cotangent, which is abbreviated COT, that is equal to the reciprocal of tangent. So if tangent is opposite over adjacent, then cotangent equals adjacent over opposite. Also keep in mind that cotangent, since it's a reciprocal of tangent, and we know tangent can be defined in terms of sine over cosine, cotangent is equivalent to cosine over sine. So secant is the reciprocal of cosine. I like the words instead of the 1 over cosine. Cosecant is equal to the reciprocal of sine. And cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. And so again, in terms of a unit circle, remember that tangent of theta is equal to tangent theta equals sine theta over cosine theta. So cotangent would be the reciprocal, cosine over sine. Considering our work with sine and cosine, evaluate the following. First, draw or write the unit circle. Okay, so we have some space here, so let's write down our unit circle. The 4 points, the coordinates 1, 0, 0, 1, negative 1, 0, and 0, negative 1. And if you want some angle measures, 90, 180, 270, 0, and 360 are quadrantal angles. Also with the unit circle, x is equal to the cosine of the angle, and y is equal to the sine of our angle. So if we want to evaluate the secant of 90 degrees, secant, now the way I remember that it's the reciprocal of cosine is secant backwards, we have CES, which is close to COS. So secant of 90 is the same as reciprocal of cosine of 90. The cosine of 90 degrees would be the x-coordinate 0. So 1 over 0 is going to be what we call undefined. cotangent of 270 is equal to the reciprocal of tan. Reciprocal tan 270. And tangent we know is sine over cosine. So we want cosine over sine. Cosine of 270 is going to be the x-coordinate, 0. And the sine of 270 is the y-coordinate, -1. So this is going to equal 0 over -1, which is 0. Cosecant of 180 degrees. I remember that it's the reciprocal of sine because of this single s between the two c's. So this is equivalent to the reciprocal of sine. The sine of 180 is the y-coordinate, 0. 1 over 0 is undefined. Cotangent of 90 degrees is the reciprocal of tangent. Tangent would be sine over cosine, so we want cosine over sine. Cosine is the x-coordinate, 0. Sine is the y-coordinate, 1, which is 0. Cosecant of 360 is equivalent to the reciprocal of sine of 360. The sine of 360 would be the the y-coordinate, 0. So 1 over 0, which is undefined. And the secant of 180 degrees, that's equivalent to the cosine or reciprocal of cosine of 180. Cosine of 180 is the x value, -1. So 1 over -1 is equal to -1. Which of the following is closest to the value of secant 52? Well, this is equivalent to the reciprocal of cosine 52, which would be 1 over cosine 52, in which case we go to the calculator. We need to make sure our mode is in degrees. Right now it's radian. So arrow down and over till we're on degree, press enter, back to the home screen, and 1 over cosine 52. So this would be 1 divided by, let me use a fraction bar, 1 over cosine of 52, 1.624. Choice 2. There are certain angles which make secant, cosecant, cotangent denominators equal to 0 by making the function undefined. As we saw, we had several undefined in exercise number 1 above. Which of the following values is not in the domain of y equals cosecant x? Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So cosecant x is equal to 1 over sine x. When is sine x equal to 0? So the y-coordinate. In this case, try to look at, so we're looking at a y-coordinate value of 0. So if I go back up to the unit circle, 0 degrees and 360 and 180. And what is listed here is 180. Because each of these functions depends on sine, cosine, or tangent, we determine the sign, SIGN, positive or negative, based on the quadrant of the input angle. Remember using all students take chemistry? Let's just draw an X and Y axis. All students take chemistry. Our quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4. Determine the sign of the following trig functions in the quadrant given. So this is the Greek letter beta, cotangent beta for beta in quadrant 2. Well, cotangent's reciprocal of tangent, so I'm thinking of 1 over tangent. In quadrant 2, tangent is negative, so negative. Secant beta for beta in quadrant 4. Secant is 1 over cosine, and in quadrant 4, cosine is positive. So secant, it would also be positive. Cosecant beta for beta in quadrant 3. Cosecant's the reciprocal of sine. In quadrant 3, sine is negative. So cosecant would be negative as well. Exercise 5, if cotangent beta is less than 0, in other words, if 1 over tan is negative and secant theta is greater than 0, secant's the reciprocal of cosine, so 1 over cos is positive, which of the following then theta could be which of the following angles in y? Well, tangent's negative and cosine's positive in quadrant 4, so we have to be in quadrant 4, and the 310 degree angle would terminate in quadrant 4. We should be able to produce all 6 of the trig ratios if we are given 2 sides of a right triangle. So for exercise number 6, we have a right triangle shown below with side lengths of lowercase a and lowercase b. Find the length of the hypotenuse in terms of a and b and label on the diagram. Okay, so for the hypotenuse, we take a squared plus b squared equals our hypotenuse, c squared, or x. I could have used x. Square root. So c equals the square root of a squared plus b squared. Why don't I put plus or minus? Because this is the length of the side of the triangle, so we only use positive. Cannot have negative length. State the value of each of the following trig ratios in terms of the constants a and b. Okay, so these are all for angle A. So in relation to angle A, well, first off, this is our hypotenuse. In relation to angle A, lowercase a is the side opposite, and lowercase b represents the side adjacent. We're using SOHCAHTOA. The sine of A is going to be opposite over hypotenuse. A over the square root of a squared plus b squared. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so we want just that reciprocal. The square root of a squared plus b squared over a. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. B over the square root of a squared plus b squared. Secant's the reciprocal of cosine, so just take the reciprocal here of our fraction. Square root of a squared plus b squared over b. And tangent is opposite over adjacent. Opposite is A, adjacent is B. Cotangent is the reciprocal, B over A. And lastly, if A is an angle whose terminal ray lies in quadrant 4, and the cosine of A is 1/3, then determine the exact value of cosecant of A. So we are in quadrant 4, and the cosine of A is 1/3. So I'll draw our angle and then the reference triangle. Cosine, that's adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent is 1, hypotenuse is 3. Use Pythagorean theorem to figure out the other side or other leg of our right triangle. Cosecant is reciprocal of sine. Cosecant is going to equal hypotenuse over opposite. So we just need the length of the side opposite here. So I'll say that 1 squared plus b squared equals 3 squared. That's 1 plus b squared equals 9. Subtract 1, b squared equals 8. b equals plus or minus the square root of -8. Nope, just square root of 8. We are in quadrant 4, where sine is going to be, or its reciprocal is going to be negative. So this would be negative 3 over square root of 8. Okay, so 3 more things to memorize. Secant is reciprocal of cosine, cosecant reciprocal of sine, and cotangent reciprocal of tangent. Thank you for your attention.